There is an unspoken hierarchy in the modern world of dog ownership, a silent caste system dictated by the size of the animal at the end of your leash. If you own a creature that can fit comfortably inside a designer tote bag, society grants you absolute impunity. Your dog can lunge, scream, and bite at the ankles of passing strangers, and the world will merely chuckle at its spunky temperament. But if you hold the leash of a large breed, especially one with the wolfish silhouette and formidable reputation of a German shepherd, you are instantly cast as the villain in everyone else's suburban drama. You are expected to be flawless. Your dogs must be statues of obedience, utterly devoid of natural instinct, lest a single misstep brand them as a public menace. I knew this burden intimately. I lived it every single day, navigating the razor-thin line between giving my dogs the life they deserved and keeping the judgmental eyes of the world at bay. Until one frosty Tuesday morning, when the sheer, unadulterated audacity of an entitled stranger finally snapped the last fraying thread of my sanity, and I decided that if society wanted a monster, I was more than happy to oblige. Life in a third-floor apartment with two German shepherds in the absolute peak of their velociraptor phase was an exercise in extreme logistical management. Balthazar and Rook were barely 14 months old, an age characterized by gangly limbs, boundless kinetic energy, and a chaotic desperation to chew on the fabric of reality itself. They were 80 pounds of muscle and goofiness, thrust into a world that demanded they act like seasoned retirees. To preserve my drywall and my sanity, I had developed a rigid, non-negotiable routine. Just beyond the edge of our apartment complex sat the sprawling campus of a local agricultural college, bordered by vast, rolling pastures that lay dormant and beautifully empty in the early hours of the morning. Long before the sun crested the horizon, before the campus stirred to life, I would load Balthazar and Rook into the back of my rusted hatchback. We would drive to the farthest, most isolated quadrant of the fields. The air out there was always sharp and biting, thick with the smell of damp earth and crushed clover. For exactly 45 minutes, I would unclip their heavy tactical harnesses, and they would transform from cramped apartment dwellers into magnificent, untethered beasts, chasing each other through the dew-soaked grass in wide, joyous arcs. This was our sanctuary. I was fiercely protective of it, not just because they needed the exercise, but because both Balthazar and Rook carried the invisible scars of a traumatic past. Months prior, while walking on a narrow city sidewalk, we had been ambushed by an off-leash mastiff mix. The sheer terror of that encounter, the snarling, the frantic tangling of leashes, the desperate scramble to put my own body between the attacker and my pups, had left all three of us deeply anxious around unfamiliar dogs. I sought out these empty fields specifically to guarantee our absolute isolation. On this particular morning, the sky was bruised with the pale violet of impending dawn. The boys were in the middle of a high-speed wrestling match, their breath pluming in the frigid air, when the hairs on the back of my neck suddenly prickled. A figure was cresting the gentle slope near the tree line, roughly 200 yards away. It was a woman swathed in a heavy quilted coat, clutching a retractable leash. At the end of that thin, neon cord strained a dog that defied the very concept of canine grace. A pug of such profound, spherical density it looked less like a living creature, and more like a burnt loaf of bread on tiny, struggling stilts. Normally, the sight of another early riser wouldn't be cause for alarm. The field was massive, easily the size of 3 football pitches. There was more than enough room for a dozen people to walk their dogs without ever crossing paths. Operating on my standard protocol of polite avoidance, I pulled a silver whistle from my pocket and blew a short, sharp trill. Balthazar and Rook, bless their eager hearts, immediately abandoned their mock battle and sprinted back to my side, sliding into the damp grass to sit at attention. I knelt, clipping their heavy leather leashes back onto their harnesses with a reassuring metallic click. I expected the woman to continue along the perimeter, tracing the tree line as most casual walkers did. Instead, she adjusted her trajectory, turning her boots deliberately toward the dead center of the field, toward us. A cold knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I gave the leashes a gentle tug, leading Balthazar and Rook in the opposite direction, aiming for the gravel parking lot. We had only taken a dozen steps when the sound reached us. It started as a wet, congested wheeze, rapidly escalating into a frantic, high-pitched shrieking. The pug had spotted us. It was throwing its entire gelatinous weight against the end of its retractable line, its bulging eyes locked onto my shepherd's, screaming with a ferocity that seemed physically impossible for its size. The woman didn't shorten her leash. She didn't correct the dog. She simply kept marching toward us, dragged slightly forward by the pug's manic lunges. I stopped, my heart beginning to thud against my ribs. Balthazar whined, a low, nervous sound vibrating in his chest, and pressed his heavy shoulder against my thigh. Rook's ears pinned flat against his skull, his tail tucking defensively. The trauma of the past attack was flashing behind their dark eyes. They were terrified of this wheezing, screaming projectile advancing upon them. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice tight but loud enough to carry over the crisp morning air. "Could you please give us some space? My dogs are nervous and we're trying to leave." The woman closed the distance to within 30 yards. I could clearly see her face now, a mask of pinched, self-righteous indignation framed by a severely cropped bob. She halted, planting her boots in the grass, and let the retractable leash spool out even further. The pug surged forward, the thin cord vibrating with tension, its wet, gargling barks echoing across the empty expanse. "Well," she shouted back, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. "If you are going to let your dangerous breed run rampant without leashes in a public space, it should be perfectly fine if I let mine run around, shouldn't it?" I stared at her, the sheer illogical absurdity of her statement freezing the blood in my veins. The field was entirely abandoned. Balthazar and Rook were currently double-leashed, sitting pressed against my legs in perfect, trembling obedience, while her gremlin of a companion was actively trying to incite a bloodbath. "They are leashed," I yelled back, my voice cracking slightly under the sudden, overwhelming pressure of the confrontation. "We are the only people here, I just want to take them to the car." "Please call your dog back, they shouldn't be here at all," she snapped, crossing her arms over her quilted chest, allowing the pug to strain dangerously close. "Those things are weapons. You're completely irresponsible." The sheer injustice of it felt like a physical blow. The exhaustion of constantly defending my dogs, the hypervigilance, the carefully orchestrated routines to ensure we bothered absolutely no one, all of it came crashing down on me in a wave of suffocating embarrassment and defeat. My throat tightened, thick and painful. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to prove a point. I just wanted to protect my dogs from the paralyzing fear that was causing them to shake against my legs. I didn't say another word. I turned my back on the woman, gripped the leather leashes with white-knuckled intensity, and practically jogged the remaining distance to the gravel lot. The wet, hacking barks of the pug followed us the entire way, a humiliating soundtrack to our retreat. By the time I popped the hatch of the car, hot, angry tears were blurring my vision. Balthazar and Rook leaped into the back, circling nervously before settling into their beds. They looked utterly defeated. We had been in the field for barely 10 minutes. The pent-up energy was still humming beneath their coats, their morning ruined. I slammed the hatch shut, climbed into the driver's seat, and gripped the steering wheel. I rested my forehead against the cold leather, letting the tears spill over. It was so agonizingly unfair. I took every precaution. I absorbed the dirty looks, the whispered comments in pet stores, the people crossing the street when they saw us coming. I absorbed it all so my dogs wouldn't have to, and yet we were still treated like monsters. Taking a shuddering breath, I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve and glanced up at the rearview mirror. Through the smudged glass I could see the field. The woman was standing exactly where I had left her, but she wasn't walking. She was reaching down, unhooking the metal clasp from the pug's collar. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. She hadn't been afraid of Balthazar and Rook. She hadn't actually cared about leash laws or dangerous breeds. She had seen a massive, empty field, decided she wanted it entirely for herself, and calculated that the easiest way to get it was to bully the solitary owner with the stigmatized dogs into leaving. I watched the pug waddle away from her, sniffing at the very patch of grass where my boys had been playing minutes before. The woman stood tall, surveying the empty pasture like a conquering monarch who had just successfully routed the peasant uprising. Something inside my brain, a vital civilized load-bearing beam that kept my rational thoughts organized, simply gave way. It did not break with a loud snap, it dissolved into a cold, crystalline silence. The tears stopped instantly. The suffocating weight of societal expectation evaporated, replaced by a profound, feral clarity. The voice of reason, which usually governed my conflict-averse nature, went entirely quiet, replaced by a dark, primal whisper echoing from the deepest recesses of my primate ancestry. "Show her," the whisper hissed. "Show her a dangerous animal. I didn't formulate a plan. I didn't consider the consequences. I simply reached out, rolled down all 4 windows of the car so Balthazar and Rook could watch, and opened my door. I stepped out onto the gravel. The air felt different now, sharper, electric. I began to walk back toward the field. My pace was steady at first, but with every step, the pent-up rage of 1,000 retail shifts, 1,000 unfair judgments, and 1,000 silent apologies began to boil over. The woman noticed my approach when I was about 50 yards out. Her smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. She looked toward my car, clearly checking to see if I had brought the shepherds back out. When she realized I was alone, she puffed up her chest, preparing her next volley of self-righteous venom. She opened her mouth to speak. I didn't give her the chance. At 20 yards, I dropped to all fours. The damp grass soaked instantly through the knees of my jeans and the palms of my hands, but I didn't care. The civilized human vanished, entirely consumed by the spirit of pure, unhinged chaos. I locked eyes with the pug, threw my head back, and unleashed a sound that defied description. It was a guttural, roaring bark, ripped from the very bottom of my diaphragm, echoing across the silent college campus with terrifying volume. The pug froze, its bulbous eyes widening to the size of dinner plates. I charged. I scrambled over the wet earth on my hands and knees, tearing through the grass with a speed that genuinely surprised me, barking and snarling like a rabid beast straight out of a mythological nightmare. RAWR, woof, I bellowed, throwing in a deranged, slavering growl for good measure. The pug's bravery evaporated instantly. It let out a sound that I can only describe as a piglet being fed through a wood chipper, a high, vibrating squeal of absolute mortal terror, and bolted. "What are you doing?" the woman shrieked, her voice cracking an octave higher. Stop it right now." I did not stop. I pivoted on my palms, digging the toes of my boots into the mud, and altered my trajectory, chasing the screaming loaf of bread in a wide, frantic circle. "Get away from him, help, someone help." The woman was panicking now, her heavy quilted coat rustling violently as she tried to give chase. But she was utterly unequipped for a pursuit. She was lumbering, breathless, trying to catch a gremlin that was currently engaged in evasive maneuvers to escape a feral human. I barked again, a sharp, concussive sound, and lunged toward the pug's left flank. The dog scrambled, its tiny claws tearing up chunks of sod, and made the fatal tactical error of seeking refuge behind its owner. It darted directly toward the woman's legs, a desperate, squealing blur of wrinkles and panic. The woman tried to sidestep, but the pug weaved. It shot directly between her heavy boots just as she was shifting her weight. The physics of the moment were exquisitely perfect. The retractable leash handle flew from her grasp as her ankles were swept cleanly out from under her. She went airborne for a fraction of a second, her arms windmilling wildly, before gravity reasserted its dominance. She hit the soft, muddy earth with a spectacular, breathless thud. She landed squarely on her back, her thick coat puffing out around her, trapping her arms at awkward angles. She looked exactly like an overturned tortoise, her legs kicking uselessly at the morning sky, sputtering and gasping for air while the pug cowered a few feet away, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. I stopped. I rose slowly from the dirt, brushing the wet grass from the palms of my hands. I stood over her, breathing heavily, the cool air burning my lungs. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was intoxicating. "You're insane," she gasped, struggling to roll her heavy frame over in the mud. "I'm calling the police, you're an absolute psychopath." I looked down at her, a profound, serene calmness washing over me. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt lighter than I had in years. "You wanted to see a dangerous animal," I said, my voice eerily steady, accompanied by a bright, completely unhinged smile. "Now you have the field all to yourself. Have a beautiful morning." I turned on my heel and walked away. I didn't run. I strolled. The sound of her frantic scrambling and indignantly breathless threats faded into the background, drowned out by the euphoric pounding of my own heart. When I reached the car, Balthazar and Rook were waiting, their heads hanging out the open windows, tongues lolling in canine grins. They had watched the entire spectacle, and while they couldn't possibly understand the nuances of human pettiness, they seemed to recognize a victory when they saw one. I climbed into the driver's seat, my knees still damp and smelling of crushed clover. I started the engine, threw the car into drive, and pulled out of the gravel lot without a backward glance. We didn't go home. We drove straight to the local coffee shop drive-thru and ordered 2 massive cups of whipped cream. I ended up taking them for a long hike on a wooded trail later that afternoon, a walk where they pulled me mercilessly, completely ignoring their leash training. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I let them pull. I let them be dogs. There is a profound lesson hidden in the muddy aftermath of that frosty morning. Society often mistakes compliance for weakness and kindness for an invitation to impose their will. As responsible owners of large, misunderstood breeds, we spend so much of our energy shrinking ourselves, apologizing for taking up space, and bending over backward to accommodate the irrational fears of others. But sometimes, when you are backed into a corner by sheer entitlement, the most therapeutic thing you can do is stop apologizing. You don't have to absorb the toxicity of people who refuse to see your efforts. And occasionally, when the situation demands it, embracing the absurdity of their accusations and giving them exactly what they ask for is the only way to set your own spirit free. If you've ever had to deal with the exhausting double standards of the dog park, or if you simply appreciate the beautiful chaos of petty revenge, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell me your most unhinged pet owner stories in the comments below. Until next time, stay wild, stay petty, and always protect your pack.